So I thought that one of the things that we may be able to talk about today is this idea of the maiden and the goddess archetypes that you write about in your book. And two things. Well, first of all, can you expand on what you mean by those things? I know you've talked about it in your book before. But I think you also have something interesting to say about the difficulty sometimes that happens in the transition from a maiden into a goddess archetype, because it's a significant psychological and perspectival shift. You are changing into a different kind of person. And I think you have some really important insights into some of the challenges that are associated with such a big transition.
Yeah, I think that, let's review the archetypes. So the maiden archetype is the first adolescent archetype. So it's the transition from girlhood into young adolescence. And as I talk about in the book, the hero archetype for men is somewhat similar. It's the transition from boy to man. One of the differences between men and women, I think, is that men have this one big transition. They move from boy to manhood, and the rest is the development within manhood. Whereas women go through multiple changes through their lifetime. The maiden is the first one. The second one is the goddess of love, and the third one is the wife, then mother and crone, and so that's transitionary periods. And I think that necessity of transition creates challenges for women that men don't necessarily experience. So the maiden is centered around this notion of purity versus desire. The goddess of love archetype is centered around the notion of pride versus values. And it's interesting how those things develop, because for the maiden, the necessary growth is the growth of judgment, the ability to discern, the ability to, for the maiden, the development of desire is prejudicial. It's an interesting claim that if you desire a man, for some reason, he's not, you don't necessarily just want anyone. Oh, it's because he's strong, or because he's intelligent, or because he's whatever. But when you add a because, you suddenly are judgmental. You're no longer pure in that sense. You're no longer purely compassionate and broadly non-judgmental. You have grown a bit, but you've also paid a cost. You've lost that girlish innocence that is, we see that in movies all the time. Cinderella, the birds come and they just land on her and they have no fear. And she has a generalized universal compassion. And that ends to some degree with the development of desire, because desire is specific and prejudicial. So when the desire comes up, then she moves into the goddess of love. And now the thing is, well, in the process of desiring a man, she realizes that, wait a minute, that's a significant amount of power. I now have sexual power. I have something that they want. And that power, which makes me a goddess in some sense, also has to be wielded responsibly. And so I have to use judgment and develop values in order to wield that sexual power responsibly. Those are the rough outline of the two archetypes. I think the topic that we brought up and that we wanted to talk about was the notion of transition from one to the other, where perhaps a woman has developed desire but doesn't yet have the judgment of who to trust and who not to trust, doesn't have the judgment of a certain set of values that she can apply both externally and internally to say, well, I'm not going to sleep with, for instance, a man who doesn't display these values. And in a young woman's life, often that can be a traumatic transition, because she has the desire, she has sexual desire, she has interest, but she doesn't yet have the discernment that allows her to pursue that safely in our society. In older societies, parents took over. In older societies, they said, okay, well, we're going to assign you a marriage. And, there's a ton of problems with that pop up, but it was intended to supplement this young period where There is desire, but not judgment yet. And so it was just an interesting notion that that period can be so difficult to navigate because we've lost our tribal structures. Like, we've lost the notion that your parents can steer you when your judgment isn't yet fully developed through that desirous period. And so anyway, just rounding out the archetypes, and then I'll let you jump in, is the shadow archetypes of the maiden are the Madonna and the whore, the ultra pure and the ultra impure. So that's the shadow side. The shadow of the goddess of love is the coquette and the slut. The one who takes pride in her ability to tease and not satisfy, and the one who has no pride and satisfies everyone without judgment or discernment. The coquette, by the way, is equally without judgment or discernment. It's opposite answers, it's yes or no, but not let me evaluate, decide, and move forward.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to note that there's a parallel between the transition of a maiden archetype to a goddess archetype, because the difference between the two, of course, is judgment. And we've had a lot of conversations when we've talked about the concept of love, where Jesus would preach unconditional love, God without reciprocity. And yet the tension always is that you have to also have judgment. You have to be able to say that, no, we are moving in this direction, not another direction, and that requires judgment, and that requires perhaps even a negative experience with another person. And so that's kind of why perhaps also the transition from maiden to goddess is a little bit jarring, because when you are starting to differentiate, there's a hierarchy that develops, and now you know that there's a hierarchy, and then you ask yourself, where do I fit in this hierarchy? That could be a bit of a jarring experience. So for example, if you are a young woman and you're coming into your adulthood and you're starting to become aware of your potential to be a goddess, yield all this power, well, what happens if society doesn't find you attractive? You don't get the kind of attention that you feel like you should. There's a lot of angst there as well when you don't get to make any judgments because no one wants you. And so there's also that anxiety about whether or not you're going to be able to fulfill that archetype at all if you are going to end up becoming an object of desire that men might want to covet.
I'm sure that happens. I would argue that the more common experience is an excess of desire. And that comes with its own angst, because the desire is to some degree, and I talk about this in volume 2 as an interesting notion, the desire is to some degree impersonal, in the sense that it's desire based on what you can do for me, not who you are. And this is an interesting challenge. Is I desire you because you can satisfy my sexual needs, for instance, just putting a raw kind of point to it. But on some level, where is your personhood in that, right? Now, men are a little bit more comfortable with that because we engage in a more transactional, impure view of the world from a younger age. The notion that, yeah, you want to be friends with me because I provide you with intellectual conversation, with willingness to have your back. There's an exchange that's understood. But that exchange is fundamentally not romantic. And that's a tension in sexual desire, because sexual desire is fundamentally not romantic. Romance is valuable, but I think a lot of women mistake the notion that if they pursue more romance, they will feel more desire or they will experience more desire. And that often works completely opposite. You end up more romantic, more sweet and loving, and then you can't find the erotic. It's lost because you went in the other direction. And so there is this challenge between the transactional needs of a relationship that, hey, we both have needs and those needs have to be met. And the non-transactional needs in a relationship is, yeah, I want you to satisfy my sexual desires, but I want you to want it, right? And hey, I want you to take care of me and I want you to be affectionate with me if I'm a woman, but I want you to mean it. When my husband texts me 3 times a day and always sends me these loving messages, well, if you find out that he just set up a script on ChatGPT to send you an affectionate message, that takes the wind out of your sails a little bit. I mean, if she never finds out, sure, but the problem is inevitably she will. She'll reference something you didn't know you said. And so the problem is how to mean it in both directions. And that's not transactional. You can't transact authenticity. And so in the notion of love here, I think that is part of the challenge, is that the maiden views love as this pure thing, right? It almost can't be mixed with sex. That's the Madonna kind of leaning there. Or then it's very binary. It's like, or you're a whore. And women and men fall prey to this view. It's a very binary, whereas when you integrate both and you say, no, there's a healthy version of desire. You don't have to stand apart from it. You don't have to give up all dignity in favor of the transaction. I mean, people have joked about this, that marriage is just prostitution by another name. And we see where that's pointing. We understand what's being said there because there is a financial aspect to marriage and there's a sexual aspect to marriage. But we rebel a little bit against it because it takes something that is integrative and makes it back into the binary. It's just a transaction, and that's not quite true. So anyway, I think that transition from maiden to goddess is just a particularly interesting one because I think a lot of young women struggle with it because they're taught this sort of compassionate, universal version of love, and then they struggle with the transactional, where it's like, no, hey, you're going to meet a guy and he's going to have expectations of you. And yeah, that's not romantic. But at the end of the day, if you're not meeting his needs, if you're not fulfilling what he expects and needs from you, then a relationship's not going to work any more than the reverse will. Guys, on the other hand, struggle often with the romantic is, yes, I value you for all the things you do for me, but a woman wants to be valued for her inner being, her inner self, irrespective of anything she has done. And that's romance. It's the unique specialness. And figuring out how to do both, because both people are coming from opposite ends of that spectrum, I think is a big part of the challenge of this transition.